Federal Judge Susie Morgan orders the Cantrell administration into court next month.
She's demanding the city prove it didn't violate the federal consent decree when handling the investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie. Natasha Robin explains.
I don't think it's any surprise whatsoever.
Some city leaders say they saw it coming. U.S. District Judge Susie Morgan issues this rule to show cause for the city to prove it didn't violate the federal consent decree when handling the investigation into NOPD officer Jeffrey Vappie.
It's not with a violation of one or two separate paragraphs. It's about 10 different paragraphs in the consent decree where the court believes that the city may have fallen short and is demanding the city produce evidence.
Vappie, a member of Cantrell's security detail, became the subject of a series of Lee Zurich investigations, highlighting the hours Vappie spent both on and off the clock with the mayor inside the city-owned Upper Pentalba apartment. The NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau opened its investigation into Vappie and sustained 3 violations, which led to a letter of reprimand. But federal monitors later found that PIB committed 8 violations of the consent decree when investigating Vappie.
The monitors are claiming that the police department didn't complete this investigation in a timely manner. Part of that was it because this involved the mayor of the city of New Orleans and the mayor's executive protection team member? Was it a byproduct of the understaffed problems in the police department that of course includes the Public Integrity Division?
Raphael Gonetti with the Metropolitan Crime Commission believes the court is trying to determine if this investigation was treated differently than others.
Because one of the fact witnesses was the mayor. When this investigation was commenced, the first words that we heard from the mayor was that this was a witch hunt.
Judge Morgan also asked the city to show paperwork detailing Vappie's reassignments over the course of the investigation and who approved them. Councilman Joe Geruso points out no matter what, the federal judge is concerned about whether the city is in compliance with the consent decree.
Vappie investigation is a symptom of perhaps what may be the larger problems.
This rule to show cause is really about whether or not the police department, particularly the Public Integrity Division, is in compliance with the consent decree.
The mayor claims the police force has reached nearly full compliance and suggested in the past that federal monitors stay in their lane.
Stay in their lane, stay focused on the consent decree, and if we do that, and if they do that, they will get to the place where I am. I know that we're at a place of substantial completion.
If this isn't our lane, I don't know what is.
Now the federal judge over the consent decree is stepping in, demanding the city come forward with answers on August 16th about the probe into Officer Vappie. Natasha Robin, Fox 8, Local First.